Hi there, I'm Clifford Bates, and welcome once again to our next session of reading John Locke's second treatise of government. Today we're looking at chapter 2, which is titled On the State of Nature. Um, uh, this is basically going to be this is not a super long chapter, but it's not also a super short chapter. Where is my I'm going a little bit disorganized because I had my copy right next to me. But there it is. Sorry. I knew right next to me. John Locke, the second discourse. I'm using the Google Books edition because you can see it on the thing, but I'm also looking at the Croft's edition that I have here. Is one of my favorite editions because I have my notes in it. So some notes in here. The second chapter is how can I say it's pretty long. It's a long chapter. It has um, basically 15 paragraphs. So therefore 15 minus 3, so 12 paragraphs. Um, it is one of the it's a pretty long chapter here. So let's go to it. First section, section 4. To understand political power right and derive it from its original, from its origin, we must consider what state all men are naturally in. That that is a state of perfect freedom to order their actions and dispose of their possessions and persons as they see fit, within the bounds of the law of nature, without asking leave or depending upon the will of any man. So in other words, this is your free. In other words, your state of perfect freedom in the sense that you're not bound by any other man. And the only thing you're bound by is the law of nature. But what is meant by the law of nature? Now, we can say the law of nature means natural law. Some people argue that. Or it could just mean the laws of physical nature. In other words, the laws of physics, the laws of reality. That's the only thing that matters here. Is Locke talking about here the laws of nature in its traditional sense, the laws of nature, which was us natural, which was commonly understood in the classic tradition as like the natural law, or is Locke really just referring to a more Newtonian, dry thing? So this is unclarity here for that purpose here. He can play on both. In other words, continued second paragraph of that fourth section. A state also of equality, wherein all the powers and jurisdiction is reciprocal, no one having more than another, there being nothing more evident than that creatures of the same species and rank, promiscuously born to all the same advantages of nature and the use of the same facilities, should also be equal one amongst another, without subordination or subjecting, unless the Lord and Master of them all, by any unless the Lord and Master of them all should, by any manifest declaration of his will, set one above another and confer on him by an evident and clear appointment an undoubted right of dominion and sovereignty. So he's, in other words, Locke says, basically saying that, well, given if you're, everything that of the same species and type that are born are has the same what he says right and justification as any other one. All right? This is what equality means. It basically says that, well, if you're this thing, you're all equally this thing. Okay? If you're human, okay, all humans are human, so therefore all humans are equally human. It doesn't mean anything more than that. It doesn't mean that everything's the same or identical. Equality here only means that of a type. You're that everyone of a type, and given that man has this capacity, these capacities or these abilities, all men generally have these abilities as a human being. So therefore, this is what equality means. There's nothing great about this here. Uh, Now, let's continue here. In other words, and then it said that you're all the same except this thing, unless the Lord and Master of them all should make a manifest declaration. So God, Lord and Master here can be God, in other words, or the Creator of the universe, the Creator of them. In other words, who is the Creator? The person the person has dominion and mastery of mankind. uh, God. This is implicitly, but he doesn't say it. This is a case where it's clear. One could think that is it, but is he being clear here, or is this kind of joking? Is he knowing? Does he understand that no, there is no Lord and Master, and therefore this cannot happen? Okay. In other words, that if there's only a God, only some kind of Lord and Master of man, and by his manifest declaration of his will, set one above another and confer to him the right of dominion and sovereignty. Okay. This is a clear another jab making fun of Filmer and the idea of divine right of king. Okay. Section 5. This is about, if we look here, this is about look at this is about 2 paragraphs again. Um, this equality of men by nature. Of course, now he's going to call it the judicious hooker. This is Richard Hooker, the great, a time of basically right after Elizabeth, this Elizabethan English right political theorist and churchman. Rich Hooker's famous book, The Laws of Ecclesiastical Polity. It's a classic. I have a couple copies of over here. The Everyman, Duvine Everyman edition. This is one of the classics of things. And Locke kind of treats Hooker as an authority. Now, Hooker represents what we call a kind of the Church of England basically, he's against the Puritans, but he's also not Catholic. So therefore, he's kind of a Christian Aristotelian, but not a Catholic. He's not Thomist, but he uses language like the Thomists to defend the Anglican Communion. Okay, the Church of England against the more radical Puritans. So Locke, by embracing Hooker, is clothing himself in clothes of the Anglican doctrine that the Church of England kind of embraces, particularly after during the Restoration, the post-Civil War period, and the Restoration. The Anglican Church was Charles, not so much James, but Charles declared the Anglican position as the true church faith of the church. So Locke, by clothing himself in the clothing of the Anglican, of Hooker, the divine Hooker, he is not only clothing himself within as someone kind of the respectable position of authority, but also clothing himself in the language of this Christian Aristotelianism. So he talks about this same judicial Hooker, looked upon it so evident and beyond all question that he makes it the foundation that all original that obligation to all mutual love among men, on which he builds the duties they owe one another, from whence he derived the great maxim of justice and charity. In his words, now this is a quote from this here now. This paragraph here is from the Ecclesiastical Polity, Book 1, right? Like the natural inducement which brought men to know that it is no less their duty to love others than themselves, foreseeing these things which are equal must needs all have one measure. If I cannot but wish to receive good, even as much as every man's at every man's hands, as any man can wish until his own soul, how should I to have any part in my desire within satisfied, unless myself be careful to satisfy like desire, which is undoubtedly in other men, being one of the same nature, to have anything offered them repugnant to this desire must need in all respects grieve them as much as it is me, so that if I do harm, I must look to suffer, there being no reason other than others show great measure of love to me, than that they by me showed upon to them unto them. My desire, therefore, to be loved of my to be loved by my equals in nature as much as possible may be imposed upon me a natural duty of bearing to them towards them fully the like affection. Because this is like from which relation of equality between ourselves and them that are as ourselves, what several rules and canons natural reason hath drawn for the direction of life. No man is ignorant. In other words, all man knows this. This is the classic kind of Thomistic neo-Christian argument that men have their reason, not only the teachers of the canon of the church, but also their natural reason. It makes them knowable about the good that of this reciprocal justice, that no man does harm to other, knowing that they can be harmed unto him. This is the golden rule. Do unto others as well you'd like do unto yourself, or the silver golden rule. Now, Cox here likes to point out of how there's some hanky-panky going on here. In other words, what's good? It's not in this edition, but on a line, but on Carmel says in this first 15 quotations from Richard Hooker. This is the first of 15. So in other words, Locke will use Hooker a lot as an authority that he will paint himself into. This is from Book 1, Section 10 of Ecclesiastical Poetry. The other quotes are in sections 15, 60, 61, 71, 90, 91, 94, the part 2, 111, 134, 2, the second group, 135, and then 136 in the second part. All but one of the quotations are from Book 1 concerning the laws and their several kinds in general. 10 are from Book 1, Section 10, which treats civil government. Locke quotes selectively and not always exactly. The reader is urged to read Section 10 to compare what Locke says and what Luther says in each case. In other words, he recommends you do it. He doesn't give the note for this, but then it should. I mean, I'm not going to do that because I don't have a good copy of that I can put on the screen. You should go look at it, because what happens here is Locke is sometimes changing Hooker. Okay, this is a classic case of kind of playing with the text. Selectively quotes. He doesn't quote. He quotes. In other words, he's quoting what's useful to him. Okay, which may be distorting what Hooker himself actually does. And this is why the essay by Cox here goes into a very good amount of detail, examining how Locke does that. And not only in this, it's in the Strauss-Cropsey History of Political Philosophy edition. Cox also goes in there and shows how Locke is kind of disingenuous here on what's going on here. So now let's look at section 6, which is a paragraph long. But though this be a state of liberty, yet it is not a state of license. Now this is colon. In other words, he's saying, "Oh, but this would be liberty." Now, what he's trying to argue is that this is not the same as Hobbes. See, Hobbes argues in his Leviathan that there's perfect freedom also, but this means that this is man can do whatever he wants. Okay, Locke wants to say, no. I don't really mean what Hobbes said. What I'm doing here is different than Hobbes. Don't make me, because by this time Hobbes is very much criticized, and Locke is kind of, trying to distance himself from Hobbes. No, not a state of license. Liberty, not license, right? Though man in the state has an uncontrollable liberty to dispose of his person and his possession, yet he had not the liberty to destroy himself, or so much as any creature in his possession, but where some nobler use, that is, bare preservation, calls for it. Now he's saying, well, you can't hurt yourself, and okay, yeah, but why? Oh, the laws of nature again. Therefore, he's kind of deferring. But what does he mean by the laws of nature? Uh, are these really not the laws of nature, but rather are these not divine commands? Does not God say? Is this really why? Locke doesn't really give a clear argument here. He's relying on the Christian belief and Christian presuppositions and the classical presuppositions that, oh no, because there is in nature there is a justice, a right and a wrong, and there's penalties. But wait a minute, is there? No one's a judge of anyone else here. In many ways, he's agreeing with Hobbes, but denying he is agreeing with Hobbes. So what he says, it is not at liberty to destroy himself, nor any creature's possession, but where some nobler use than a bare preservation calls for it. The state of nature has a law of nature to govern it. Again, but what is meant by the law of nature? See here, this is I think he's playing. This is a case where, does he mean that there is a natural law, that there's a moral law involved here, that there's a moral law? But if there's a moral law, who's enforcing it? And is there consequences for not enforcing it? Okay. If there's no consequences for not enforcing it, then how is it a law? Okay. Or is this merely a law in the sense that there is that nature itself has some things that you can't do against, and that if you act in other words, like the law of gravity, like, okay, something falls down. That's a law. Okay, drop this. If I let go of the pen, it's going to fall. Right? That's a law. The laws of governance. So what is meant here? Which obliges everyone and everyone, and reason, which is the law, teaches all mankind who will consult it, that being all equal and independent, no one ought to harm another in his life, health, liberty, or possessions. For men being all the work. For men being all the workmanship of one omnipotent and infinitely wise maker, all the servants of one sovereign master, sent into the world by his order and about his business. They are his property, whose workmanship they are, made to last during his, not one another's pleasure, but being furnished with like faculties, sharing all in one community of nature. There cannot be supposed any other subordination among us that may authorize us to destroy one another. And if we are made for one another's use, as in inferior ranks of creatures are for ours, everyone as he is bound to preserve himself, not only to and not to quit his station willfully, or by the like reason, when his own preservation comes not in competition, ought he, as much as he can, to preserve the rest of mankind, and may not, unless it be to do justice on an offender, take away or impair life, or what tends to be the preservation of life, liberty, limb, health, and or goods of another. So wait a minute. Okay, sounds like there's a kind of law here. There's in nature, even though it's this natural freedom, that reason dictates certain, reason, our mind, grasps upon certain aspects and certain things. But okay, one could know it, but what is it? But if it's a law, there must be penalties or enforcements, right? That's the classic definition of a law. A law must be promulgated by authority, but there's also must be an authority to enforce or punish the breach of that law. This is that classic four criteria definition of law that St. Thomas himself talks about in the Summa, about the definition of law. And Roman law always understood that a law has to have not only a promulgator, but it must also have someone who's going to act an authority enforcing. And that if nature is not, if there's not a judge or a authorized authority, judge who has authority as judge or the authority to enforce, that's a problem then. So then let's look at section 7. And that all men may be restrained from invading another's right and from doing hurt to one another, that the law of nature be observed, which willeth the peace and preservation of all mankind. The execution of the law of nature in that state put into every man's hands, whereby everyone has the right to punish the transgressor of the law to such a degree as may hinder his violation. For the law of nature would, as all other laws that concern men in this world, be in vain if there were no body that in the state of nature had a power to execute the law, and whereby preserve the innocent and restrain the offender. So they're saying, well, there's no agent that can defend us. It'd all be in vain, right? But the problem here, what is the problem here? The problem here is that there is no agent that is completely awesome. Rather, every individual, everyone is for himself. Every man or every person is for himself. The agent. It's self-help. In other words, only the self-actor is the enforcer. It's left to every individual to protect his own interest. In this sense, there's no other body, no other actor will do it, has the authority to do it. Only each individual on their own. See the problem here? Okay. So therefore, yes, if someone's going to harm your interests, then you don't like that. You want to stop that. But is there a requirement for someone else who's not you to stop him from doing this? Not so sure. It's not that clear in that sense. In other words, it would be in vain if there were no body, not as a person, no body, then in the state of nature had power to execute that law and preserve the innocent and restrain the offenders. And if anyone in the state of nature may punish anyone for any evil he has done, everyone may do so. So therefore, everyone can do that. Everyone can punish someone else. But wait a minute. Okay. Is it ultimately that? But okay, let's continue. For in the state of perfect equality, where naturally there are no superiority or jurisdiction of one over another, what any man may do in prosecution of the law, everyone must needs have a right to. So therefore, this is the idea of equality. That if anyone can, okay, everyone, if I'm able to defend myself, everyone has the right to defend himself. If, in other words, therefore, everyone has the right to defend. No one has one more of a right or more a claim to do something as anyone else. So therefore, I can punish the wrongdoer. Therefore, everyone can punish the wrongdoer. But here's the problem: will they? The question is, would it be in their interest? Right? They can do it. In other words, there is the right to punish the wrongdoer. But what is going on here? Now, section 8. Thus, in the state of nature, one man comes by a power over another, yet no absolute or arbitrary power to use a criminal when he has got him in his hands, according to the passionate heats or boundless extravagancy of his own will, but only to retribute to him far as a calm reason and conscience dictates, what is proportionate to the transgression, which is so much as may serve for the reparation and restraint. For these two are the only reason why one man may lawfully, okay, this is the problem, lawfully. There's no laws in nature, okay? There's no real laws. There's no real laws for agents. In other words, but the laws of nature. See, Locke is relying on the language and logic of law. But law is the order of a society, a social network. Law only exists in a social dynamic. But he's saying there's no, there's this perfect freedom. Wait a minute, is there perfect freedom really? And if it's perfect freedom, there must be a natural society. A natural, and where there is a law, there is government. Okay, where there's always law, there must be government. Without government, without authority exercising justice over justice, there is no law. No government, no law. Law, government. Therefore, the question is there government in the state of nature? He says no. So if there's no government in the state of nature, can law exist in any meaningful way? Let's think about that for a second. Do harm to, in other words, there are only two reasons to serve reparation and restraint, for there are two reasons why one man may lawfully do harm to another, which is, we say, called punishment. In transgression of the law of nature, the offenders declare himself to live by another rule, and that of reason and common equity, which is the measure, which is that measure God had set to the action of men for their mutual security. And so he becomes dangerous to mankind. And tie, which, okay, this is that word, and okay, this is a typo in the text. And again, this is another quote to, no, hold on, sorry. And tie, tie, and with the tie, that's very annoying, typical, tie, the tie, which is, and it's not type, this is actual spelling of the time, okay? The tie, which is to secure them from injury and violence, being slighted and broken with him. In other words, the criminal is the one who's like, I want to harm you. I know I shouldn't do it, but I do it anyways. And therefore, this makes him a transgressor, makes an enemy of mankind. And therefore, because he broke the ties that hold us together. But, okay, which is a trespass against the whole species. And the peace and safety of it, provided for by the law of nature, every man upon this score. By the right he has to preserve mankind in general, may restrain or, where it is necessary, destroy the noxious to them, and so may even bring such evil on anyone who hath transgressed the law, as may make him repent of doing it, and thereby deter him, and by his other example, from doing the like mischief. And in the case, and upon this ground, every man has a right to punish the offender and be executioner of the law of nature. So every man is the judge and executioner. But wait a minute, he will say later something that will make this problematic, right? Now let's take section 9. I doubt not, but this will seem a very strange doctrine to some men. But before they condemn it, I desire them to resolve me by what right any prince or state can put to death or punish an alien for any crime he commits in their country. It is certain their laws, by virtue of any sanction they receive from the promulgated will of the legislature, reach not a stranger. They speak not to him, or if they did, he is bound to hearken to them. The legislative authority by which they are enforced over the subjects of that commonwealth hath no power over him. Those who have the supreme power of making the laws in England, France, and Holland are to an Indian like the rest of the world, men without authority. And therefore, if by the law of nature every man hath not a power to punish offenses against it, as he soberly judges the case requires, I see not how the magistrates of any community can punish an alien of another country, since in reference to him they can have no more power than what every man naturally has over another. So this is a wonderful logical sophism. He says, well, if you don't believe what I'm saying here, that you only have we have only the power. In other words, he says that governments have these power because they are within the state of nature. So therefore, if this didn't exist, what I'm saying here doesn't exist, then nature's would, since the aliens coming into our country, we would not be able to punish them because they don't respect our laws. They're not of us. But that's kind of a spurious argument. They're there because they're under our power, okay? And if you're in our thing, you must, and this is our way, you're expected to play by our rules. And if you don't play by our rules, tough luck for you, right? But can't say that, okay? So Locke kind of plays this very nice rhetorical trick here on this to kind of say, oh, there's a logic here. But no, we have to, why can't you make the conventionalist argument that no, these are our laws, and if you're we're going to allow you to be here. We're going to let you be here on the condition you obey them and accept them. If you're not going to obey them and accept them, then we don't have to tolerate you, and we can kill you also because you're the enemy, you're the foreigner. You're not us. And if we are a threat to us, in other words, that's what I mean. Doesn't this actually even point that if this person becomes a threat, the person becomes a threat in his own natural logic, that a threat to the safety and security of us is someone who breaks the norm of this norm, becomes someone that we can punish or to kick out or to or even kill. Okay, so okay, yeah, but then if you do that, you accept my position. It's a very interesting trick here. Now, 10, beside the crime which consists in violating the law and varying from the right rule of reason. In other words, right rule of reason dictates right rule of reason should tell you what was right to do, and that is what the law says. Okay, this is what, and declares himself to quit the principles of human. In other words, the rule of reason, where a man so far becomes degenerate and declares himself to quit the principle of human nature and to be a noxious creature. There is commonly injury done to some person or other, and some other man receives damage by his transgression, in which case he who hath received any damage has, besides the right of punishment common to him with other men, a particular right to seek reparation from him that have done it, and any other person who finds it just may also join with him that is injured and assist him in recovering from the offender so much as may make satisfaction for the harm he has suffered. In other words, restitution. You've harmed me. You've caused me some bad and something and cost me things. I can stop you from harming me, and then I can also take from you to compensate you for what the damages you've done to me. Okay, and not only each individual has it, everyone else. But again, this presumes society. But if there's no society, why would you help your fellow? Okay, I mean, in other words, he's kind of relying on kind of a notion of friendship that exists, that fellow feeling and fellow, if there is, but is there a logic in his system for friendship? He relies on by Hooker, he's relying on Hooker and this Aristotelian understanding which understands that man is social by nature, and that the laws in other words, in social moral restraint and law itself is within the order of nature itself, and there's natural, and every political body is the embodiment. So therefore, government is a natural, a product of nature itself, not something merely created by men. Okay, Locke doesn't want to say. Locke won't say that. Locke will argue that that the state is not natural. Agrees with Hobbes on this point, but rather the state is a convention men make to secure something that isn't that nature by itself does not secure. That's Hobbes. That's Leviathan. Um, Locke is a little more subtle than that. Locke ultimately does agree with Hobbes, but he doesn't do it so explicitly. He does it kind of it's the ultimate consequences from this. Now, Section 11. From these two distinct rights, the one of punishing the crime for restraint and preventing the like offense, the right of punishing is in everybody. The other of taking reparations, which belongs to the injured party, comes to pass that the magistrate, now a magistrate, okay, where's the magistrates? Natural magistrates? Okay. It comes to pass that the magistrate, who by being magistrate hath the common right of punishing put into his hand, can often, where the public good demands not the execution of the law, but remit the punishment of criminal offenses by his own authority, but yet cannot remit the satisfaction due any private man for the damage that he's received. So therefore, maybe I don't punish you, but I have to pay back the damages. So even this, the idea that even though this magistrate can forgive the criminal act, he has no power not to stop the individual from seeking restitution. Okay, that he who suffered the damage has a right to demand in his own name, and he alone can remit. In other words, this is the common law. This is the English common law in a very fundamental sense. That, in other words, Locke is kind of embracing the law as his kind of, this is also true here. But this law, but law is a civil. Again, this is a construct of a given government, a given structure. This is not simply in nature. This is something. The law of England, the common law, is not a natural law. It is the particular civil law of a particular kingdom, England. Okay, so that he who has suffered the damage has the right to demand his own name, and he alone can remit. The damaged, the damnified person has the power of appropriating to himself the good or services of the offender by the right of self-preservation, as every man has the power to punish the crime, to prevent its being committed again by the right he has of preserving all mankind, and doing all reasonable things that he can do in order to that end. And thus it is that every man in the state of nature has the power to kill a murderer, both to deter others from doing the like injury, which no reparation can compensate, by the example of the punishment that attends it from everybody, from everybody, and also to secure men from the attempts of a criminal who, having renounced reason, the common rule and measure God has given upon to mankind, hath by the unjust violence and slaughter he hath committed on one, declared war against all mankind, and therefore may be destroyed as a lion or a tiger, one of those wild savage beasts, with whom men can have no society or secure. And upon its grounded that men that the great law of nature, in other words, this upon which is grounded the great law of nature. So there's no wild beast. Men can have no a society with savage beasts, and that the criminal is a savage beast. Okay, and there's no and things that you cannot have society with, you cannot be in peace with, and therefore they are a threat, and therefore you have a right to destroy them. Okay, um, so that's okay. And upon this is grounded the great law of nature. Who sheddeth? This is that line. This is the quote now. This is from the Bible. Right? Who sheddeth man's blood? By man shall his blood be shed. And Cain was so fully convinced that everyone had a right to destroy such a criminal, that after the murder of his brother he cries out, "Every one that findeth me shall slay me," or was so plain it was in the writ in the was it writ in the hearts of mankind. In other words, he's quoting the Bible, the Cain story, that after Cain slew Abel, and he's going to be punished, saying, "Well, wait a minute. If that's the case, everyone will punish me, and no one, will protect. Okay, that proves what you knew it was wrong to do it." Chapter 12. By the same reason, may a man in the state of nature punish the lesser breaches of the law? It will perhaps be demanded with death. I answer, such transgressions may be punished to the degree and with so much severity as will suffice to make it an ill bargain to the offender, give him cause to repent, and terrify others from doing the like. In other words, you have to. In other words, if you want to prevent transgression, you have to make it. In other words, you have to make it not worth the trouble. You have to raise the cost. It's cost benefit analysis there. He's saying that in nature, in this case, therefore, any transgression of the law, even minor laws, have to be responded to with enough, some penalty that every individual gets to put. And remember, it's self-help. Therefore, you get the harmed party, or the people fearing being harmed party, gets to impose the penalty, so that you will make to scare enough people to see that the cost of doing this will be so high, it's not worth doing, right? So such severity as will suffice to make it an ill bargain to the offenders, give them cause to repent, and to terrify others from doing the like. Every offense that can be committed in a state of nature may in that state also be punished equally, and as forth as it may in the Commonwealth. In other words, as far forth as it may. In other words, it goes way beyond what would be in nature. The penalty for retaliation for a crime may even go way beyond. Not only can you punish him, but the kind of punishment may go way more than what one would expect in a Commonwealth, right? For semicolon, full colon, sorry. For though it would be besides my present purpose to enter here into the particulars of the laws of nature or the means of punishment. Yet it is certain there is such a law, and that too, and that too as intelligible and plain to a rational creature, and a study of law as the positive law of commonwealths, nay, possibly plainer, as much as reason is easier to be understood than the fancies and intricate convenient contrivances of men, following contrary and hidden interests put into words. For so truly are a great part of the municipal laws of a country, which are only so far right as they are founded on the laws of nature, by which they are to be regulated and interpreted. Sorry, I have to get some water. So here, what Locke's kind of again using the law of nature and applying these are the laws, kind of the rules of nature that which bind what is just. Okay, and that therefore laws of and he made, again this echoes very much the teaching of the ancients, who argued that the laws of any society are that society's embodiment of what is just. They think to be just, and therefore they are just to the degree that the laws are in agreement with what is just. Right. Therefore this is the degree by which a society is seen as deviant from justice. Is the degree that the legitimacy of their laws in the ancient view, the classical view was. Locke is kind of relying on that in that sense. Uh, um, and he doesn't want to get beyond it in that sense. And that in fact, his argument is that not the laws of nature are more easy to access and are more straightforward than civil law, because civil law is maybe designed for the purposes of maintaining the power of those who make it. Right. So there is this idea that there is that um, um, the laws of nature are accessible and directly accessible to reason in ways that civil law is more complex, and other contrivances of men can be construed or designed to make it less obvious. Okay, in other words, nature cannot dissemble. His argument seems to be here, whereas man can dissemble, and therefore things made by man can be deceptive, where it's the laws of nature are simply there, and that reason can, if reason is not corrupted and it's right reason, you can and you're not just and you're following it truly, you'll understand it. It'll be clearer than civil law. That's what seems to be here, right? And founded on the law of nature, which are to be regulated and interpreted. Right. This is Section 13. To this strange doctrine, viz., that in every state, that in the state of nature, everyone has the executive power of the law of nature, I doubt not, but it will be objected that it is unreasonable for men to be the judge in their own case, that self love will make men partial to themselves and their friends, and on the other side, that ill nature, passion, and revenge will carry them too far in punishing others, and hence nothing but confusion and disorder will follow, and that therefore God has certainly appointed government to restrain the partiality and violence to men. Right? So this is a great objection. Locke gives you that this objection all of a sudden. But wait a minute, if the executive power is left to every man to enforce it, Men will be judges in their own case. Their passions and their interests will abide them against the others, and they'll be more likely to punish their enemies and reward their friends, and that nothing but confusion and disorder will follow. And therefore, God is certainly appointed government to restrain the partiality and violence of men. He goes, I easily grant that civil government is the proper remedy for the inconveniences of the state of nature. So civil government is the proper remedy for the inconvenience. Therefore, this is nothing but inconvenience. Okay? Whoa, 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 whoa. But which must be certainly great, where men may be judges in their own cases, since it's easy to be imagined that he who was so unjust as to his brother do his brother injury will scarce be so just to condemn himself for it. But I shall declare, but I shall desire those who make this objection to remember that absolute monarchs are but men, and if government is the remedy for those evils, which necessarily follows from men being judges in their own cases, the state of nature is therefore not to be endured. I desire to know what kind of government that is, and how much better it is than the state of nature, where one man commanding a multitude has the liberty to be judge in his own case, and may do all to do all his subjects whatever he pleases, without the liberty to any one to question or control those who execute his pleasure. In other words, this is a critique of divine right of kings. In other words, that the king cannot be, the idea that the king can do whatever he wants and the king is the law, then the king is judge of his own case. And therefore, how is that any different than the state of nature? See, Locke is flipped. Here he flips. He accepts, in other words, at one level he says, well, this is his own convenience. But if that's the case, then if that is so bad, well, what about every government has to be compared to the state of nature, and how is it better than the state of nature? In other words, he makes the kind of argument, so, well, wait a minute, what about the government in that sense, that the king, absolute monarch, can do what he wants, and then he brings up the case of the absolute monarch, right? And he does this thing. In other words, do what pleases and to execute this person. And in whatever he doth, whether led by reason, mistake, or passion, must be submitted to. Much better it is in the state of nature, where men are not bound to submit to the unjust will of another, and that if he judges amiss in his own, any other, he is answerable for it by the rest of mankind. So in other words, he flips the argument around here to make what's a limit, then saying, oh, but so civil society is worse. But wait a minute, that's a trap. There's something illogical here. In other words, this is it sounds nice, it's a great rhetorical trick. It's a sophistry here. There's a little bit of sophistry Locke engages here. Because what happens, he seems to make the argument that my God, the state of nature is better. Well, if the state of nature is better, but wait a minute, the state of nature, civil government is the only means to do it. In other words, you can't escape. The question is, he seems to argue that the state of nature is better than an absolute monarch. But wait a minute, isn't that basically saying the state of nature and the absolute monarch are the same thing? Or no worse than it? But the state of nature still is bad. It is arbitrary. There's no enforcement. But these are Locke's own words. They're inconveniences that civil government can restore. The question then is, What type of civil government? See, that's the question. Doesn't want to get into it because maybe it is, maybe it should be, maybe there are some governments that are better than other governments. Okay. In other words, government, and particularly the question that he doesn't answer is, what about the king? Was it something wrong with the way um, the king, particularly Charles the First and and James the Second, who insisted that the law rule by their own will and their decree, and would argue that their will and decree is above the law, or is the law itself? Okay, that's a big point here. It is so often asked as a mighty objection, where are or ever were there any men in the state of nature? In other words, this is the famous argument. Is it? No, this is the argument. The state of nature is really weird. Are anyone really in? To which it may suffice to answer at present that since all princes and rulers of independent governments all through the world are in a state of nature, it is plain the world never was nor ever will be without a number of men in that state. So again, this is another trick, saying that since nations and princes and states are in relationship of anarchy to each other, that's the anarchical nature. This is the famous thing in international relations, right? That there's no order in the world. There is no legitimate order of political rule that governs all world, and every ruler is in relation to every other ruler. Every state and principality to every other state are kind of in a competition of equals, and there's no one that has authority over them. Well, if that's the case, if this is true about states and governments, why isn't it true about men? See, again, what he's done is he's taken the example of states in the world and their relation to each other, and that there lacks a government, a natural government over them, to argue that, well, that's simply that what is true for states and princes would be also true for men. Okay. I have named all governors of independent communities, wherever they are or are not, in league with others. For it is not every compact that puts an end to the state of nature between men, but only this one of agreeing together mutually to enter into one community, and to make one body politic. Other promises and compacts men may make one with another, and yet still be in the state of nature. So contracts and promises are not enough. It has to be, in other words, the creation of the Commonwealth is all. In other words, this is Hobbes's idea. This is Hobbes's position of that the Commonwealth or the body politics created when all the parties agree and enter into it, and then partial agreements and things. Now, this is where Rousseau was more radical, saying, no, Mr. Locke, sorry, no. That those earlier accidental contracts are the origins by which society emerges. Again, this is Rousseau's second discourse on equality, where he says that the first person who declares this is mine, and everyone basically is silent and denying it. In other words, and no one responds to saying no, it isn't, which happens because everyone's afraid of everyone, and no one's confronting anyone. And someone said, "Oh, this is mine," and since no one else is confronting it, over time it is yours, and so that builds society, right? And this is the point. I think this is the opposite of. I think in many ways Rousseau is criticizing Locke here in this. I think he's right on this point. That for Locke, that there can be these inferior contracts, yet still not have. You're still within nature, the law of nature, right? That yen state, in other words, for not every compact that puts an end to the state of nature between men, but only the one agreeing together mutually to enter into one community. and to make one body power. Now, he uses the word community. That's very interesting. Because this is the word community. I have another video in there about community versus society. And the word community here means, the Greek word for community and the Roman society, these are not the same words. Society is contractual relationship. Community is not a contractual relationship. It's more than a contractual relationship. So therefore, it is in fact, in many ways, this is a voluntary community. Again, see, I would read Frederick Taunis's Gemeinschaft, Gesellschaft, or community and society, to see the difference with these two terms. Where community, Locke speaks of community here, which is very interesting, and makes one body politic. Other promises and compacts men may make one another, and yet still be in the state of nature. The promise and bargains for truck, or for truck, etc., between two men in a desert island, mentioned in Galacio de la Vega in his history of Peru, or between a Swiss and an Italian in the woods of America, are binding to them, though they are perfectly in the state of nature in reference to one another. For truth and keeping faith among to men, as men are to members of society. So this is contracts to be made. Now, this is a very interesting thing that this Locke seems to argue, and this is would be very Rousseau would disagree with him, that there can be no trust and no relationship without society. That there seems to be among humankind some. Again, I think this is he has to say this to be consistent with the kind of position of the Hookean Aristotelianism here. And I think this is where the incongruity of his argument emerges. He relies on Grotius's conception that the state of nature means that it's only that there's no state, that men have society. Society still exists in nature. See, for Grotius, society exists whenever there's, in fact, this idea, society exists from the fact of any kind of contractual relation. Anytime where there's contractual reality. That's where societas means in Latin. Societas in Latin comes to mean the contractual relationships between communities or between persons, not forming a community. Okay, not forming the communitas. The communitas is greater and more natural and more binding than a societas in Latin. So therefore, this is, therefore Grotius understands that. Hugo Grotius, the father of natural law, his understanding of why there is this law of nature is because that government, there is a place without government, but still there is society. Hobbes argues there can be no society without government. There's only anarchy and chaos, and in that state of nature, there's war of all against all. Hobbes is playing between these two, between the Grotian and the Hobbesian, back and forth. And he does this with Hooker, using Hooker to go between, navigate them. Section 15. To those that say there were never any men in the state of nature, I will only oppose the authority of the judicious Hooker. I think again he uses Hooker. And then the law. This is from Ecclesiastic Politics, Book 1, Section 10, where he says that the laws which have been hitherto mentioned, the laws of nature, do bind men absolutely, even as they are men, though they have never any settled fellowship, never any solemn agreement amongst themselves, whatever among themselves, what to do or not to do, but for as much as we are not by ourselves sufficient to furnish ourselves with competent store of things, needful for such a life as our nature doth desire, a life fit for the dignity of man, therefore to supply those deficits and imperfections which are in us, a living single and solely by ourselves, we are naturally inclined to seek communion and fellowship with others. This was the cause of men's uniting themselves at first public society, in first politic societies. Now, no, that's this is Hooker. Now, if I remember correctly, well, again, if I was going to be a little more, we're going to do this more dramatically, I would. We should look at Hooker here and see how the context of her. And I think if I remember correctly, my Hooker, what he's meaning here, what Hooker means here, that there is man by nature is social. This is Aristotelian. That man, there is no, in other words, the city and the political realm is a natural reality, and so man has man's animal need and the sexual need and the reproductive need and the need for fellowship and friendship. All of these things make man societal. Now Hobbes denies that man. Hobbes on Leviathan will say man has no pleasure with other men, and that there is no pleasure, and that they would want to be isolated in the self. Locke again uses Hooker's Aristotelianism to kind of uh, 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 throw the cast that he Locke is agreeing using Hooker and kind of showing, but still embracing in the state of nature argument, and therefore make it appear that he's agreeing with Grotius rather than Hobbes. But no, because this is the problem. What you will do, and it goes, but I more for affirm that all men are naturally in that state, and so remain till by their own consent they make themselves member of some politic society, political society, right? And I doubt not in the sequel of this discourse to make it very clear. Now, so, in other words, I do doubt not in the sequel of this, the next thing he's going to do, make this more clear. So here we end. I think I've gone very detailed. I probably went way over. So I'll stop here. And if you have any questions, put them below. If you've liked what we do, like it. And I will comment. If you put a question below or comments, I will respond it. Not like didn't like it, say don't. See, and say why. What's wrong? You talk too long. You're not clear enough. Okay, whatever. Um, you can follow me, and so you subscribe, please, if you're interested and want to follow these things. And you can follow me in social media. The information below. If you want to help contribute to me doing these things more, you can always subscribe to Subscribe Star or Patreon. I'm not so good at that. Looking at that, I haven't looked at it recently. I'm a bad boy, of this. So I should do something like that. And therefore, I want to stop now and thank you for following. And see you as we turn to